You drive for show, but you putt for dough is a well-known phrase in golf, and was one that was drilled into me constantly as a youngster to emphasise the importance of putting over all other aspects of the game. But in this video, when we look at what is a good and what is a bad golf score, we're going to show how that is actually a myth, and how an analysis of millions of golf shots shows that it is the long game, that is driving and approach shots, that accounts for 2/3 of the difference between scoring of typical amateur golfers. And so if you're serious about breaking 100 key scoring barriers, 100, 90 and 80 for the first time, it's important that you get into your head the importance of the long game. So we look at first, what is the average score for typical amateur golfers. Although there's plenty of statistics available for the pros, there's not as much available for amateurs. However, we found that for men, the average score was 95.7, while for women it was 107. Now, those scores are looked on as artificially low for a couple of reasons. One is that the majority of golfers actually don't have an official handicap. Of the 24.2 million golfers in the US, less than 20% have an official handicap, and these golfers who don't have an official handicap tend to shoot higher scores. Also, with those that do have a handicap, actually don't play to their handicap that often. Research by the USGA handicap research team says that not only golfers only play to their handicap or better about 25% of the time, they will on average score 3 strokes above their handicap. So looking at those two reasons, the average score that we found for men and women golfers is probably artificially low, and is probably nearer to the 100 mark, if not a little bit higher. If we're looking then at the sort of key scoring milestones, which is what a lot of people measure themselves on in terms of scoring, and we were talking about breaking 100, breaking 90, breaking 80, we can see that the percentages who break the scoring barriers are, we obviously look at the table there, under 70, which is obviously what the pros are targeting, looking themselves at. It's a tiny percentage of players, and from the typical amateur player is the stuff of pipe dreams. Scoring under 80, we found that it was close to 5%. Under 90, 21%. Under 100, 29%. Under 110, 24%. Under 120, 10%, and over 120, 11% of your average golfer will be scoring above then. For the same reasons that we talked about before, that again, those stats are likely to be artificially low, based on the majority of players not having a handicap, and then as we saw with the USGA's handicap research, those that do have a handicap not playing it very, very often, very much between sort of 1 and 4 rounds they'll play to their handicap. So if we then look on, that gives us a view of, I mean, what is a good score, and that handicap research probably gives us a good analysis. Although obviously, what's one good score for one golfer is obviously not going to be a good score for other. If a scratch golfer shoots 89, that's obviously not a good score. If a 25 handicapper shoots 89, it's likely to be potentially their best round. So when it comes to what is a good score, everything is relative. But as I say, that USGA handicap research gives us a good feel for what is a good score for players with handicaps, and that is, if you play to your handicap, that is a good score. The way the handicap system works in the States, if you're only playing to that handicap one every 4 times, and let's say on average you'll be an average 3 strokes higher than that. So every round that you're playing to your handicap, that you can see is a good score. For players who don't have a handicap, obviously the averages of golfers that we found is a good yardstick. So as I say, we're probably looking at it, although we officially found the research from the National Golf Foundation was around 95.7 for men and 107 for women, the those figures we believe, and probably quite rightly, are artificially low. So anything a few strokes above that, probably anything breaking 100 for men on an average is a good score. Anything breaking 110, 115 for women is a good score on average. However, obviously depends on the standard of player, and a good score for one golfer will not be a good score for another, and similarly a bad score for one golfer will be a bad score for another. So the obvious thing when it comes to scoring is that everybody is looking to improve their golf scores. The great thing about golf is obviously it offers a never-ending pursuit of getting better, and perfection obviously can never be achieved. So every golfer is looking to improve their score, and an analysis of millions of golf shots by Professor Mark Brodie, who's a Columbia Business School professor. He's actually the pioneer of the strokes gained metric, which was adopted by the PGA Tour in 2011, an author of a fantastic book, Every Shot Counts. And his analysis, as I say, debunks a lot of conventional wisdoms about golf scoring, and the main one being in terms of the paramount of putting. And actually his research found that 2/3 of the difference between the scores of typical amateur golfers can be found in the long game, and that is driving and approach shots. And when it comes to the definition of approach shots, we're talking about anything 100 yards out and over from the green, and the short game, putting and chipping, actually only accounts for 1/3 of the difference between scoring between typical amateur golfers. Now that's a big thing to get your head around for a lot of golfers, given the short game is drilled into thousands, and almost all players from an early age of it is so important. However, if we actually start to look at, and beyond the examples that Professor Brodie gives, if we just look at also some of the pros and the best of all time and what they say about it and their stats, just helps to simply back this up. If we take one of the greatest players of all time, and some would argue the greatest player of all time, Tiger Woods, Professor Brodie found that between 2004 and 2012 in the PGA Tour, Tiger gained 2.79 strokes per round against the field's average, and that was close to 1 stroke better than the next best player, which was Jim Furyk. And where did the biggest proportion of Tiger's game come from? Approach shots. A whopping 46%, 1.28 strokes out of the 2.79 he gained against the average player of the field was for approach shots. If you take his putting, meanwhile, he dropped as low as 89th in the short game strokes gained ranking in 2005, a year where he actually won the Masters and the British Open, and he was only ranked 21st in putting in 2006. At no time at all in those 10 years did he drop out the top 5 for approach shots ranking, and he ranked number 1 for approach shots in 6 out of those 10 years. So given Tiger's record, it's pretty hard to argue against the importance of approach shots and debunking, as I say, Professor Brodie's research in that regard. So if we look at quotes also from players like Rory McIlroy and Jack Nicklaus, it's a fascinating insight into this in the terms of their views of the importance of different parts of the game. I just want to read you a couple of things that Rory McIlroy and Nicklaus have said in the past. So McIlroy is quoted as saying, "I don't care what anyone says about the short game being the most important. It's not. The long game puts you in position to have putts to win tournaments. Guys say you have to have a short game to win tournaments, and it is not the case, not at all." When Jack Nicklaus was told about that quote, and obviously if we're looking at Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods, I don't think anyone would question that those two whichever one is the best, they are the two best players of all time. This was Jack's response to what McIlroy said, and he said, "I agree with Rory. In fact, it was me who told him so in the first place when we had lunch last year. I told Rory that I never practiced my short game because I felt like if I can hit 15 greens around and hit a couple of par fives and two, and if I can make all my putts inside 10 feet, who cares where I chip it?" Now, it's pretty hard to argue against Tiger Woods' stats and the views of Jack Nicklaus and Rory McIlroy, who have a number of majors between them. So if we're looking at how we're going to improve our scores, there's absolutely no doubt, looking at the stats that is compiled by Professor Brodie, that it's the long game that is more important than the short game. The long game accounts for 2/3 of the difference between typical amateur golfers. That's between the 110 scoring golfer and the 100 golfer, the 110 scoring golfer and the 90 golfer, the 90 scoring golfer and the 80 golfer. It's consistent across the differences between those scoring players. As I say, I repeat, the long game accounts for 2/3 of the difference between those players, the short game only 1/3. And I'm just going to share this table with you here just to show where the differences are. And these are hard things for players. I know for me it was quite difficult to get my head around, given the prominence that putting was given over the years to me in terms of if I needed to improve my game. 9 times out of 10 people would say, go and practice your putting, go and practice your putting, when the reality is I should have been going and practicing my long game 2/3 of the time compared to 1/3 of my putting, because of that's where the gains were going to come. Now, if you're interested in finding out more about average golf scores and what's a good score and what's a bad score, and where strokes are won and lost between typical average golfers, Google the complete guide to the good, the bad and the ugly of golf scores and check out our blog post.